My beloved child. Stop scrolling for just a moment, because what happened when your name was spoken was never supposed to reach you. It started with one simple question. A question about love. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that should have changed the atmosphere in the room. Nothing that should have made one person suddenly look down, take a slow breath, and struggle to find the right words. But then they said your name. Your name. And the entire room went quiet. Not because people didn't recognize it, but because everyone there knew they weren't supposed to say it. They had spent so long pretending that chapter was closed. So long convincing everyone around them that they had moved forward. So long smiling whenever somebody asked whether they still thought about you. They had become good at hiding it. Almost too good. But last night, one question broke through every wall they had built. And before this message ends, you need to hear what happened immediately after your name left their lips, because that was the moment everyone in that room realized something they had completely misunderstood about you. Listen carefully. The conversation hadn't even been about you. At first, people were laughing. Talking casually. Sharing stories. Then someone asked a question that sounded harmless. If you could be completely honest, who was the one person you loved differently? Silence. Everyone started thinking. A few people laughed nervously. Someone gave a quick answer. Another person changed the subject. But they didn't. They froze. Their expression changed. And someone sitting close to them noticed. Why did you get so quiet? They smiled. I'm fine. But they weren't. Because the moment that question was asked, their mind didn't search through dozens of memories. It went directly to you. They remembered something small. Something nobody else would understand. Maybe the way you listened when they were speaking. Maybe the way you noticed when something was wrong before they ever said a word. Maybe a conversation that seemed ordinary at the time but somehow became unforgettable after you were gone. They remembered how safe your presence once felt. And suddenly the room around them seemed distant. Someone asked again. Come on. Who was it? They tried laughing. They tried avoiding the question. But another voice said. There has to be someone. And that's when it happened. They lowered their eyes. Their voice became quieter. And they said your name. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Almost like the name had escaped before they could stop it. But everybody heard it. And something changed. One person stopped smiling. Another looked directly at them. Someone else whispered. Wait, them? They didn't answer immediately. Because suddenly they realized what they had done. For months, maybe longer, they had kept you hidden behind carefully chosen words. They had told people they were okay. They had said it didn't matter anymore. They had acted like losing you was simply something that happened. But one name destroyed the entire story. Your name. And the strangest part? Nobody laughed. Nobody teased them. Nobody rushed to change the subject. Because the way they said your name made everyone understand that this wasn't some forgotten memory. This was still alive inside them. Someone finally asked. Do you still love them? They looked up. And for a few seconds, they couldn't answer. My beloved child, there are moments when silence tells the truth better than words ever could. That was one of those moments. Because they could have said no. One word. That's all it would have taken. No. They could have laughed. They could have said, that was a long time ago. They could have pretended you meant nothing anymore. But they couldn't. Instead, they looked away. And someone in that room understood. "Oh my God, you do." They didn't deny it. That was when the conversation stopped feeling playful. The laughter disappeared. The room became strangely still. Someone asked, "Then why aren't you with them?" That question hurt differently. Because there was no simple answer. How do you explain that sometimes people don't lose love because love disappears? Sometimes they lose it because they were afraid. Sometimes pride speaks louder than vulnerability. Sometimes timing becomes complicated. Sometimes people assume there will always be another opportunity. Sometimes someone doesn't understand the value of a heart until that heart stops waiting. And sometimes you only recognize peace after you've spent enough time without it. They leaned back. They looked somewhere beyond the people around them. And finally said, "I messed it up." 4 words. That was all. But those words carried months of regret. Someone asked, "What happened?" They shook their head. "It's complicated." But someone else wasn't satisfied. "Complicated how?" Another silence. Then they said something nobody expected. "They gave me more chances than I deserved." That changed everything. Because until that moment, some people in that room had believed a completely different version of the story. Maybe they thought you walked away too easily. Maybe they thought you stopped caring. Maybe they assumed you were the one who changed. But now they were hearing something different. They were hearing accountability. They were hearing regret. They were hearing someone finally admit that your absence wasn't random. It had a history. Someone asked, "Did they know how much you loved them?" And their face changed again. "I don't know." That answer hurt them. Because suddenly they began wondering something they had avoided for a long time. Did you leave believing you weren't loved? Did you walk away thinking you weren't enough? Did their silence make you question your importance? Did their inconsistency make you believe everything you felt had been one-sided? That possibility broke something open inside them. They whispered, "I should have told them." And someone answered, "Then why didn't you?" They had no excuse. Because deep inside, they knew. They thought there would be more time. More conversations. Another chance. Another message, another day. They assumed you would somehow always be there. Until you weren't. And that's the part they still haven't forgiven themselves for. They remembered the last time things felt normal between you. They remembered words they should have said. They remembered moments when you needed reassurance and they gave you distance instead. They remembered times you tried to understand them while they made themselves impossible to understand. And sitting there, surrounded by people, they finally saw the story from your side. Imagine caring deeply for someone while constantly wondering whether they care the same way. Imagine showing patience while receiving confusion. Imagine waiting for clarity that never arrives. Imagine being told through actions that you matter, then being shown through silence that maybe you don't. You didn't need perfection. You needed honesty. And they finally understood that. Someone in the room asked, "If they walked through that door right now, what would you say?" They smiled for a second. But it wasn't happiness. It was the kind of smile people make when they're trying not to become emotional. "I wouldn't even know where to start." "Try." They hesitated. Then said, "I'd tell them I understand now." Someone asked, "Understand what?" Their eyes lowered again. Why they left. And that sentence changed the room. Because people expected them to say they missed you. They expected them to say they wanted you back. But admitting they understood why you left was different. That meant something had changed inside them. They weren't only grieving your absence anymore. They were beginning to understand what caused it. And understanding can hurt more than missing someone. Because missing someone says, "I wish you were here." Understanding says, "I finally see what I did when you were here." There is a difference. A painful one. They continued. "I kept thinking they gave up on me." Then they paused. "But maybe they were just tired." Someone quietly said. "Tired of what?" They swallowed. "Tired of proving they cared." Nobody interrupted. Because that answer felt too real. They thought about every time you reached out first. Every time you forgave. Every time you tried to fix something you didn't break. Every time you stayed a little longer because you believed things might change. And suddenly they understood something. You didn't leave because you stopped feeling. You may have left because feeling so much was beginning to hurt. That realization followed them home. The conversation eventually ended. People left. Phones were checked. Goodbyes were said. Life continued. But for them, something had shifted. They couldn't forget the question. They couldn't forget your name coming out of their mouth. And they especially couldn't forget what someone told them before leaving. If that's really how you feel, stop lying to yourself. Those words stayed. Later that night, they sat alone. The room was quiet. And without thinking, they picked up their phone. Your name was still there. Maybe buried inside old messages. Maybe inside old photographs. Maybe inside a search history they had promised themselves they wouldn't revisit. Their finger hovered. They wanted to know how you were doing. They wondered whether you had changed. Whether you were happier. Whether someone else had learned how to appreciate the things they once overlooked. And then came the thought that frightened them most. What if you don't miss them anymore? Not because they want you to suffer. But because somewhere inside them, they had always assumed a piece of you would remain waiting. That assumption suddenly felt foolish. Because time changes people. Distance teaches people. Pain teaches people. And sometimes the person who once would have done anything to save a connection eventually learns to save themselves instead. They stared at your name. They considered writing. "Hey." Deleted it. Then. "Can we talk?" Deleted that too. Then they typed something longer. They admitted they had been thinking about you. They admitted a conversation brought back feelings they had been avoiding. They almost told you everything. But they didn't send it. Not yet. Because fear returned. What if you ignore them? What if you answer politely but coldly? What if they finally confess everything and discover they're too late? So they locked the phone. Put it down. Then picked it up again minutes later. Your name had become impossible to ignore. And this is where the story becomes deeper. Because the question wasn't simply, "Who did you love?" The real question hiding underneath was, "Who changed you?" And whether they admitted it completely or not, they knew the answer. You did. Not because you were perfect. Not because every memory was beautiful. But because something about loving you forced them to confront parts of themselves they had avoided. You showed them what patience looked like. What emotional presence felt like. What it meant to have someone genuinely care about what was happening beneath the surface. And after you were gone, they noticed the difference. They met other people. Had other conversations. Laughed at other jokes. Life moved forward. But certain things felt strangely empty. Because comparison happens quietly. Someone would speak, and they'd remember how you listened. Someone would laugh, and they'd remember yours. Someone would show interest, and they'd remember how deeply you once tried to understand them. They didn't intentionally compare. It simply happened. And that night, when your name came up, all those hidden comparisons suddenly made sense. Someone had asked, "Who did you love differently?" And their heart answered before their pride could interfere. You. That's why your name came out. That's why they couldn't immediately take it back. That's why the room went quiet. Because truth has a certain weight. People can feel when an answer comes from somewhere deeper than performance. They felt it. And so did the person who later pulled them aside. Before leaving, someone approached them privately. They said, "I've never seen you react like that." They tried dismissing it. "It's nothing." But the person shook their head. "No. That's not nothing." They became quiet. Then came a question they weren't prepared for. "Are you still waiting for them?" They laughed nervously. But the person continued. "Because every time their name comes up, you become a different person." That hit hard. They didn't realize other people had noticed. They thought their feelings were hidden. They thought their face gave nothing away. But apparently, your name had always done something to them. And finally they admitted. "I don't know what I'm waiting for." The person answered. "Maybe you're waiting for courage." That sentence stayed with them. Courage. Not a sign. Not perfect timing. Not another coincidence. Courage. Because love can survive inside someone's heart for years while fear prevents it from becoming anything real. And maybe that's what happened here. They felt deeply. But feeling isn't always enough. Love needs honesty. Love needs communication. Love needs action. Love sometimes requires risking rejection. And they weren't ready before. The question now is whether they're ready to become different. Because my beloved child, you are not meant to shrink yourself so somebody else can finally recognize your value. You are not meant to spend your life proving that your heart deserves care. You are not meant to remain emotionally frozen in one chapter because somebody else hasn't learned how to turn the page correctly. Whatever happens next, remember this. Your worth was never determined by how quickly another person understood it. You mattered while they were confused. You mattered while they were silent. You mattered when they couldn't communicate. You mattered even when they failed to show you. And you matter now. Their realization doesn't create your value. It only reveals what they were too distracted, afraid, or immature to recognize before. That night wasn't powerful because somebody said your name. It was powerful because for once, they stopped pretending. For once, they didn't hide behind. "I'm fine. I don't care. It's over. I moved on." They answered from somewhere real. And everybody heard it. But there is one final part you need to know. Before the conversation ended, the person who originally asked the question looked at them and said, "You answered very quickly." They seemed confused. "What?" "When I asked who you loved differently." They thought back. They hadn't realized it. The person continued. "You acted like you didn't want to answer, but the second you finally spoke, you didn't hesitate about the name." That observation stunned them. Because it was true. They had hesitated about whether to speak. But they had never hesitated about the answer. There had only been one name. Yours. Later, lying awake, they replayed that moment. Again. And again. And again. And eventually, they stopped asking themselves why they said your name. They already knew. The question they started asking instead was much harder. What am I going to do about it? And somewhere between midnight and morning, they opened your conversation again. This time they didn't immediately close it. They scrolled. Slowly. Through old words. Old jokes. Old arguments. Old promises. Old versions of both of you. And something inside them broke open. They realized how many moments had contained love that neither of you knew how to protect. They realized how many opportunities they had wasted waiting for the perfect moment to be honest. They realized the perfect moment may never exist. Then they reached one particular message. Something you once said. Maybe something simple. Something they barely noticed at the time. But reading it now felt completely different. Because now they understood what had been underneath your words. You had been asking them to choose clarity. To choose honesty. To choose you without making you beg for it. They hadn't understood then. They understood now. Their eyes filled with tears. Not because the past could instantly be changed. But because for the first time, they could see exactly where they lost something precious. And then they did something unexpected. They started typing. Not, hey. Not, I miss you. Not some casual excuse designed to test whether you would respond. Something honest. They wrote. I don't know if I have the right to say this anymore, but tonight somebody asked me a question about love, and I said your name. They stared at those words. Their hearts started racing. Then they continued. I didn't plan to. I didn't even realize I was going to say it. But I did. And everyone looked at me like they suddenly understood something I've been trying not to understand myself. They paused. Their thumb hovered over the screen. Then one more sentence appeared. I think losing you taught me what having you actually meant. They read it. Once. Twice. 3 times. And suddenly the fear returned. Because sending those words would change something. Maybe not between you. But inside them. It would mean admitting the truth. It would mean dropping the mask. It would mean accepting that you could reject them. And for the first time, they understood something you may have understood long ago. Love without courage becomes regret. So they sat there. Phone glowing in the darkness. Your name at the top of the screen. Their confession underneath. And their finger hovering over send. Whether those words ever reach you isn't the most important part of this story. The important part is what happened before they were written. One question forced them to stop running. One room witnessed the truth they had been hiding. One name exposed everything. Yours. So don't spend your days wondering whether you were forgettable. Don't measure your worth by somebody else's silence. Don't assume that because someone didn't know how to hold your heart wasn't worth holding. Sometimes people understand what they had only after they're forced to describe what they lost. Sometimes a simple question opens a door they've spent months trying to keep closed. And sometimes, when everyone expects a different answer, one name changes the entire room. Yours. Because when the question was about love, they could have named anyone. They could have avoided answering. They could have lied. They could have chosen the safe response. Instead, after all that time, all that distance, all that pretending, they said your name. And nobody in that room expected what happened next. Not even them.